gesture in the classroom. So over to you, Mike. Good luck and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Sean. And hello, welcome to sunny Spain. Down here in Seville, I'm calling from CLIC International House. My name is Mike Bilbrough, and as Sean just said, I'm going to be talking about gesture in the classroom. Now, first of all, I would like you to listen to something. This is a group of 9 and 10-year-olds, and they are reading in the classroom in chorus. They are in fact reading part of a story, and the extract you can see on the screen. So, Sean, could you activate the first audio, please? Right, well, actually, there was going to be a little question there just before the audio was activated, and I was going to ask if you noticed anything strange about that reading. Presumably you think they're reading from a text on the board or from a screen at the front of the class. In fact, if you did think that, you would think, well, it was rather strange, it was rather sort of hesitant, and lots of different words coming out. Well, that was because they weren't reading from a screen at all, but they were reading from the teacher who is gesturing at the front of the class. So they are not referring to text at all, but they are referring to gestures as they are performed by the teacher. So what's happening is the teacher is gesturing, and each student is uttering after interpreting the meaning of the gestures. And so that's why it sounded rather hesitant. There were students who were correcting themselves. You heard synonyms coming out for a particular word. But I believe it makes the task much more cognitively active than reading from text. Anyway, I think I should explain myself. Why am I doing this? What am I doing with gestures? Well, in fact, I studied gesture as part of my PhD at Seville University. And this was then there was an experimental group from a school near Seville who helped me with this task. And videos were made which you can see on my website, and I'll give you that address later on. Now, it would be nice to go into theory of gesture and share that with you, but I don't have time to do that today. But I'm going to make references to areas of teaching and learning which I'm sure you are very familiar with. For example, the use of kinesthetics in learning. The use of the body in learning is something which is known to most teachers, and motorics is another word really for kinesthetics, the movement of the body to express meaning. There's a lovely word, embodiment, which is used a lot in research papers on the use of gesture and kinesthetics in learning. Embodiment really means the use of the body to express meaning as well as speaking. And then it's a lovely term as well, the grounding of language, used by Glenberg, for example, who said that words and syntax need to be grounded in a bodily experience to strengthen memory and learning. He was referring to words and syntax in second language learning. And then the term multimodal, I'm sure you're familiar with as well. The fact that there are many benefits of having different channels of input to facilitate learning, the kinesthetics, the visual, and the audio. I mentioned, for example, Maria Montessori, who I'm sure you've all heard of, and her success at the manipulation of objects with children, and how that helped in the learning process, and her life was dedicated to that. And then much more recently, total physical response, which was conceived by James Asher in the 1960s, and how he used actions to combine with the L2 spoken language to reinforce meaning and to help recall. On the subject of gesture in the classroom, natural gesture we could call it, there has been a lot written too. Marian Gullberg, for example, said that language teachers who gesture in the classroom are more successful than those who are more static. And then, of course, there also has been quite a lot of research on the way learners themselves facilitate communication between themselves using gesture, by that natural absence they have, the lack of the spoken word. Gestures supplement and support the communication. But I was very fascinated with all this, and I wanted to go one step further. I wanted to harness the power of gesture, if you like, and make the use of it in the classroom much more systematic. Now, what do I mean by systematic? Well, when we are presenting new language in the classroom, we have to do it from some sort of reference, don't we? We can use a picture to present a new word, a picture of something. We can actually just explain what a word means. We can use realia in the classroom. We can use a gesture itself, perhaps, that is also useful. But what I'm saying is that when we present new language in the classroom, what we should do, could do, and what I am doing, is to provide a gesture always for that new piece of lexis. So provide a new gesture, and there it is, freeze that gesture. What I mean is, by freeze that gesture, is to maintain that same gesture with your students from then on, so that whenever you want to mention that word or elicit the word from your students, you do it always with the same gesture. And that will mean that although perhaps students have forgotten the word itself, the meaning is being conveyed through gesture. Let's take an example of a vase. The Americans, a vase. So this is quite simple. We can actually just draw this one kind of an iconic fashion with some flowers in the top there. So when we present that word, we'll do that gesture, and that will be the gesture that we'll keep from then on in. After many years of using gesture in the classroom, quite extensively with primary school children, I have found that using gestures is perhaps for me, the fastest way of conveying meaning in the classroom. There is no other tool that I can find, and I'm including in that appraisal flashcards, for example. There's nothing that can be quite as rapid and quite as efficient as the use of gestures, because gestures can be performed on the spur of the moment, and we can do one after the other, so we can actually convey to our learners not only words, but words strung one after the other, so we get sentences. So this system I call for the use of gesture in this fashion, consistent gesture. So if, for example, a house is going to be like this, and then it will always be like this. This is the gesture for house and also home. Now, when I was doing my thesis on this, I was so enthusiastic, I got down and actually compiled a huge dictionary on the gestures that I developed over the past years. In fact, some 2,500 illustrated gestures in the dictionary, and I very hopefully sent it up to the publishers, the Seville University publications, to publish this. But they turned it down. They said to me, hey, but what do we need a dictionary for? Teachers can invent their own gestures. Why do they need your gestures? Okay, point taken. So I'm just going to give you here some pointers, some guidelines, if you would like to develop gestures in your classroom. And the first thing I think to remember is the importance of consistency when we are gesturing. The idea that if we want gestures to work, that there has to be some sort of relationship between them. Excuse me. So I'm going to gesture the personal pronouns. Okay, so it's I, you. That makes sense, doesn't it? So by the same token, I'm going to have he, and this is she, if I get hold of my ear, which is somewhere under here. And this is it. I'm going to keep that on the screen. And then I need we, which is going to be I, and I'm going to include the whole of you, and back to I again, and that is we. And then they is he, which in the plural, of course, or she in the plural. Now, plurals are shown by vibrating or trembling, if you like, the gesture, like that. I don't know if that is coming over. So that is they. So what you can see then is that the gestures are all sort of interrelated, and they form a family, and it makes them more memorable by doing that. Now the other pointer I put here is the assistance in gesture anticipation. Message here. You mean between you and the trainees? Are you talking to me? Yes. Oh no, I was talking to somebody else. Sorry. The assistance in gesture anticipation. Now that means that okay, if we have a gesture, it would be useful that learners can actually anticipate meaning from a gesture, so they actually guess what the gestures are themselves. I'll give you an example of that. Now, if I just do that and say, what's that? It's my hand, right? No, it's not my hand. It's a tree. Aha! Now, that changes things. If it's a tree, well then, this here must be a branch, right? And if I go like that, there, that must be a leaf. And if I go like this, something that falls off in autumn, that must be fruit. And so if I go like that, I'm talking about the bark, and the sap rising in the spring, and all those wonderful things. So you can see then that it's a good idea to have coherence between your gestures, so they all sort of interrelate, and it even can be anticipated before you actually present the meanings to the class. Now, when I'm starting a course with a group of 9, 10-year-olds, they obviously come with their own repertoire of knowledge of English, and they are the words they know already, but I will still teach those words in gesture. Now, why? Well, here's why. Book, for example, is a common word. This is the gesture for book. And, of course, they know that word. But if I teach the gesture of words they're already very familiar with, then I can then easily incorporate those into other sentences and make those sentences understood. So then the book, this is past tense, fell on the floor. I'm doing that kind of slowly because it's a little bit blurry. Good, okay. Now, I'm just going to divide then the benefits of gesture, using gesture, into different sections. Comprehension is obviously the most important one. And here I'm going to talk about the elimination of communication breakdown in the classroom, something that we're all petrified of, and we don't want this to happen in the classroom. We want to be able to communicate to our students and get them to understand what we're saying, and it's terrible when things don't work. Gesture can sort of alleviate that problem very much. Here, for example, this is the extract you saw earlier and a little bit more of the story, which is, again, it's on video, and you can see that at my website. Montague Pilkinson's plane crashed in the desert. He didn't have any food or water. He was hungry and thirsty. His leg hurt, and he was a long way from a city or town. Then suddenly he saw a man. He was riding a camel and carrying a suitcase. Now, I gestured up to there, fine, because, of course, you see, I present these gestures beforehand, and it's sort of like an accumulation, really, along the course of learning gestures. And then I got to this word suitcase, and this is on the video as a case study, so you can watch it. And I went like that, which is the gesture for suitcase, and they didn't know the word. For some reason I hadn't taught it, or they'd forgotten it. But what happened was, when I went like that, they said, bag, big bag, open bag, and about loads of different variations on bags. So the point is that although they didn't know a word, there was no communication breakdown because of the underlying support of the gestures, the meaning through the gestures, meant that communication could continue. I then just told them what the word was, a suitcase, and explained it, and we carried on. Okay. Now, from the other point of view, this is then from the student to the teacher, learner to teacher. Here's a story. But the frogs aren't comfortable in the new house because when they jump, they hit their heads on the ceiling. This is a story that she is telling to me, right? And she gestures while she does that. And there was a word which was comfortable, and she couldn't remember that word, but she gestured it, which is sort of like this. You can see her doing this. So I immediately knew what the word was and could facilitate that word, and there was no breakdown in communication. And this offers our learners then really a wonderful way to boost confidence when they are involved in production activities, even fluency production activities. Okay, I'm just going to finish with this one here, and this is where we have eliciting language. We will often need to teach explicit language in the classroom because of the curriculum that we have. We have explicit assessment, so it's useful to be able to give sort of exercises where they practice explicit language. Now, in this case, this is with subject and object pronouns again. So I can do that quite simply. Instead of having written exercises, I can do these orally and the whole class together. I saw you, but you didn't see, and the students all call out me. So this is a wonderful way of making grammar oral in the classroom, and taking it off the paper and not reducing always to written exercises. Okay, do I have time for this one? This is a similar thing. This is a drilling of using gesture, and what it was is that the students call out the gestures, and it's just a quick way of orally feeding back the items that we need to practice in the classroom. And this is practicing don't and doesn't in a very sort of drill-like, normally rather a dull way. But because the teacher's not actually saying anything and the students are doing all the uttering, well, then it is quite novel and quite interesting. And so, Sean, if you just activate that very short audio so we can hear them drilling does and don't.
I don't understand. You don't understand. He doesn't understand. She doesn't understand. He doesn't understand. We don't understand. They don't understand. My dog doesn't understand. My dog and my cat don't understand.
My dog and my cat don't understand. And that just comes like spontaneously. The teacher can bring in any language they want. They're gesturing that, and the students is giving it all back orally. Right, well, that's really me done. I am working on other projects now with gesture. One is gesture in CLIL, content and language integrated learning, and this is useful for the teaching of technical language that they have to do, especially in Spain. This is very common, where they learn subjects, other subjects in school through English, and they need, of course, to do the sciences and everything. So the tree one, for example, is very useful, all the parts of the tree, and it just helps to keep that oral in the classroom rather than having the whole language written and reduced to diagrams. And there's another project I'm involved in Africa with schools in Africa which don't have resources for buying written materials, and gestures perhaps can supplement those the materials that they don't have in the way of course books, etc. So that's me done then. Thank you very much for listening and watching this video. If you have any feedback, any questions, or would like some help, please get back to me. My email is on my website, which is www.gestureway.com. Contact details on there. The videos are on there, and other articles as well, which you might find interesting. Please contact me. I would love to get back to you and talk to you about this. So I will say thank you very much, and goodbye from
Thank you very much.
Spain.
Don't talk about the sun. It's just started raining here. Thank you very much. I've got a question actually, because I was just curious. When you were showing the gestures for kind of like the I, you, we, she, he, and there were almost extended gestures. When does gesture become sign language? because that's essentially, you know, you're almost teaching them a language through gesture as well as the oral. And I wondered whether there was a line with it, or whether teaching them kind of official sign language might be as useful or not. You see what I mean?
I explored that avenue actually, Sean, but it seems that the use of sign languages among the hearing impaired um, are in fact quite different, really, to the sort of the iconic language that we need to convey meaning in the classroom. The syntax is all completely different, and the gestures are not always very obvious. And I did look at that first of all, and in fact there are some gestures there, because somebody picked me up. I'd even forgotten they were still there. Someone actually picked me up in a conference once. They said, "Hey, but my wife, she does that, and she teaches the sign language for the hearing impaired." So there are some there which I borrowed. Usually some sort of very iconic ones like aeroplane and things like that. And this is friend, for example. So there are some there as well, but a lot had to be adapted to just to make them more
No, thanks. It was. I was say, I was just curious
comprehensible.
watching you doing those gestures. It kind of reminded me very much of somebody speaking in signs. So it was interesting. So thank you very much for your talk. I found that really informative, and I shall be going to gestureway.com as soon as I have a spare moment to go and have a look. And I'm really, really thankful that you found a way to be here, because as I say, we.
Good. I'm happy
Yeah,
to.
because
Are there
there
no
was the
other
conversation where
questions
you
then?
thought
Is
I
there
was
nobody
talking to
actually
you
watching me?
was Emma was being interesting. She was talking about the use of gestures, but in teacher training. So there was a back channel conversation going on. But I think what you would say was clear enough to not have questions.
Right. I mean, if there's
Well,
time, I don't mind
Emma is
accepting
oh, there you go.
questions through the
So Emma
through
has
our
just said
chat.
into the chat box she was wondering if students that had been trained with gestures became over reliant on them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, actually. Yeah, it's got hooked on them, sort of addicted to them, actually. Um, it's quite could be a long answer. First of all, I would say the answer is like no, because I have actually been with students for 3 years running, from 9 to 12-year-olds with gesture, and they went on to great things with language, and there was no problem. The thing is, you see, what actually happens when you're teaching these gestures is that they become quite naturalized. I mean, if you go to Italy, I mean, you feel that you ought to, if you're speaking Italian, that you want to incorporate some Italian gestures into your Italian to make it more real. The gestures, although they're artificial, if you like, they become quite sort of natural, and they don't become addicted to them at all. Some students use those as they're communicating in the early stages to help themselves think better. Um, but it's something part of us to gesture anyway. Adding more gesture actually helps people to express themselves more. It's not a hindrance. It's not like
Or maybe it is.
transferring addiction.
Emma followed that up. Once you've started gesturing, you just can't stop.
Only for me.
Emma followed that up with a kind of another bit that was does it become problematic if with the student who's training gestures outside the classroom, or indeed if they have a different teacher?
I think the problem has been students coming to my classroom from parallel students, like in a large academy, for example. They come into my classroom from classes that haven't had gesture, because in my academy, I'm the only one who does this. But the reason is because I believe my students have a higher level because they're being exposed to much more language. So it's not really because of the gestures themselves. It's because they just know more. They know more English. Um, but I take the point. I take the point about compatibility. It'd be
but
good if
for that
just
to happen,
everybody
then your
did it.
dictionary needs to get published, and everybody needs to read it. Yeah. There you go. Right.
Well, anybody
So,
will take
thank you
that.
very much for a very interesting and informative talk. With it, let's get you off microphone. Let's stop the recording. Say